Good morning, everyone. It's Jen, and it's too early for this shit. So today we are going to go through the books that I own, that I read in 2019, and I'm gonna get rid of some and do a giveaway, probably. But first I'm gonna tell you which ones I am keeping and which ones I'm getting rid of, and why. I buy new books so often and in such great quantities because I usually go to like Goodwill or used bookstores, or I go to the library sale where they sell them like for 25 cents a piece. So I end up buying tons of books at once, and then I just have too many in my house. This is just one of like 6 bookshelves I have here. So at the end of the year, I sort of go through the books that I've read and decide to get rid of some, decide to pass some along to friends and family, and then I keep the ones that I really, really liked or that I think I'm probably going to read again. So today we're going through the books that I own that I read in 2019. We are going to start with The Titan's Curse, which is right here. This is the second book in the Percy Jackson series, which I started reading, I think, 2 years ago. And I started with a library copy of the first book because I wasn't sure I was going to like it. I wasn't sure I was going to want to read it again. But I really love this series. It's super fun, and I really like Rick Riordan. And I hope that eventually my kids will read this series. So I decided to buy the second and third books. I'm going to keep it. The first book I'm passing on is The Vegas Diaries by Holly Madison. This was one of the books that I got at a library sale for like 25 cents. I really liked it, and I had a good time reading it, and I'm looking forward to reading her other memoir, which is actually her first memoir. This is her second. The Vegas Diaries is also one of, I think, either 3 or 4 books that I ended up writing reviews of on my Medium account, which we will put a link to somewhere up here or in the description somewhere so you can read my full review if you're interested. But I'm not going to read it again, and it's just going to end up collecting dust on my shelf, so I'm going to pass it along to someone else who would also like to own it / read it and pass it along again. So between my husband and I, there are certain books that we keep pretty much as a collection, and he owns most of the Star Wars books. Yes, that includes the old EU, and actually is mostly the old EU. So I really love the old Han Solo trilogy. This is the Hutt Gambit, which I read this year, and it was okay. I love a good, like, sexy Han Solo adventure book, and this qualifies. So I'm going to keep this series on his Star Wars shelf. Okay, another one of the books that I reviewed at Medium is Street Gang, The Complete History of Sesame Street. I really didn't like this book, and I wanted to so badly, but it's so much more like financial and industry history, and what I was looking for was like cultural and psychological, because I know that a lot of research and sort of like psychology and culture went into the creation of Sesame Street. So I really wanted that, and that's not what I got in this book. I actually had heard a review of it in the podcast Literary Disco, and I sort of didn't want to believe them, which is a foolish thing to do because 9 times out of 10 I agree with them. But they were right, and I didn't love this book, but maybe someone else will, and I'm passing it along. Alright, so the next item on the list is actually kind of a 2-parter because it's keep / get rid of. These are the Eternal editions of the Sailor Moon manga. I got the first 2 this year and read those. These are outstanding. If you like Sailor Moon, which I do, I've kind of been reading Sailor Moon manga since I was in, I think, middle school when I picked up the paperback like mangas at Borders. And so I actually had like the first 4 in this format, which is just like black and white, small paperback editions, which are really lovely and wonderful. But these new definitive editions came out with these like translator notes at the back, and they are really quite spectacular. Like, the paper is just really good quality. The translator's notes are really interesting and fun, and it's got like a holographic cover, and it's like really shiny pages, and then Each chapter starts with a really pretty color page. If you're a Sailor Moon fan, I highly recommend the Eternal editions, and I'm going to go ahead and keep upgrading to these and pass along my older mangas. Okay, so the next double feature that I'm keeping are Will Grayson, and Turtles All the Way Down. And I am keeping both of them partially because I love John Green and I have all of his books on my shelf and I keep them there and I revisit them every now and again. And partially because I really like having books with a variety of representation in them, which these books have. Mostly this one has mental illness represented in it, which I did not expect. And Will Grayson has a really great LGBTQ storyline in it. So I'm going to go ahead and keep these on my shelf, and I'll probably read Will Grayson again. I tend to read John Green's books really, really quickly on the first go round. I think I read Looking for Alaska in one sitting the first time I read it, and I've read Paper Towns probably 3 or 4 times. It's one of my favorite books of all time. So I'm going to keep these on my shelf. The next book I'm passing along, I sort of struggled with whether or not to keep on my shelf. But To All the Boys I Loved Before. I really enjoyed this book. I had a good time reading it, but I think I missed the boat on being the target demo. Lara Jean is a really sweet protagonist, and I love that it's a book that's not an all-white cast of characters. I really enjoyed the Netflix movie version, and I'm looking forward to the next one. I'll probably read the second and third books, but I might get them from the library next time. I really love romance, but I like it with a little more angst and a little more edge to it. I think maybe I'm just into characters that are a little bit older. I don't know. I probably just won't read this one again, which is a bummer. I really like fake dating tropes. I really like fan fiction-y, tropey stuff. And this has all of that, which, I mean, I can't not recommend this book. It's a lot of fun, and it was really good. And like I said, I am looking forward to reading more of them, but I just probably won't need to keep it on my shelf. So I'm going to pass it along to someone else who may love it more and want to keep it forever. Okay, so the next book I'm keeping is a tie-in novel. It is Darkness on the Edge of Town, which is the Stranger Things book that I read before season 3 came out. I really love Stranger Things. I'm doing my paper presentation on it in March, and right now I'm just going through Stranger Things thing. So I'm going to keep this one on my shelf for now. I may eventually kind of give up my Stranger Things collection. I used to have a lot more Doctor Who tie-ins that I ended up passing along eventually, but for now, Stranger Things stays on the shelf. I really actually liked reading this book, and I'm going to read Runaway Max, which is currently on my bedside table. Darkness on the Edge of Town is kind of fun. It's like 98.9% canon post season 3. It's really obviously written by a British person, which is kind of funny to me. And there's a lot of like clothing description for being a Hopper-centered book about crime in New York City. I don't know, if you want some young Hopper kind of becoming that cynical skeptic that he is, that we see in the show, and if you want something that's kind of easy to burn through, if you really want your Stranger Things universe expanded, then pick up Darkness on the Edge of Town. Just not my copy because it's going to stay on the shelf. The next book that I'm passing along is a book that I really did not enjoy reading at all. It's been on my shelf for years. It's called Paul is Undead, and it's a bummer because I really, really wanted to like this book. I picked it up at Comic-Con a few years ago during kind of the height of the zombie craze. I think it was the year The Walking Dead got made into a TV show, so there was a lot of hype around it. I feel like I probably met the author, but it's been sitting on my shelf since then, and I finally got around to reading it and just didn't have that great a time. I don't know what I expected. I don't like zombies. I do like the Beatles, so I sort of thought that I guess the Beatles of it all would be enough to sort of keep me involved, but Paul is Undead is like an alternate history of the world. It's like if the Beatles were zombies, because zombies were just like a different class of citizen, which is interesting and should have been better than it was. But it's a lot of like middle school boy humor about like balls falling off and weird semen dust that I just didn't dig. It's not my jam. Maybe someone else will like it more than I did. Didn't have that great a time. So on it goes. All right, let's talk about writing books. So this year I read 2 classic kind of writing guides. I read Annie Lamott's Bird by Bird, which is another book that's been sitting on my shelf for forever. And then Stephen King's On Writing, which I really loved. Stephen King is the author who gave the advice that if you don't have time to read, you don't have time to write, which I highly agree with. I love both of these books. I got really into Stephen King about 2 years ago, and by really into, I mean into it all. I had never read anything by him before, and I just dove right in with it, which I loved so much. I read it in 3 weeks, and by the end of the book, I was honestly crying, and not from fear, just from like feelings and loving the characters so much and being so sad for the conclusion to the Losers Club story. And I just thought that was a beautiful thing for a horror writer to do to a person. So I'm definitely keeping Stephen King's On Writing. It's got tons of pages sort of like marked off and drawn in. And I love that. And I will probably also read Bird by Bird again. It also has a bunch of pages sort of marked off and sort of written in. So those 2 books will definitely go right back on my shelf of books about writing. Okay, so the next book that I'm passing along is Soulless. It's the first book in a series. It's like Victorian era crime fighting. There's a werewolf. There's vampires. I thought I was going to love it. I wanted adult Twilight, and I kind of got the sexiness that I was looking for, but I didn't love the romance between the 2 main characters. It's very antagonistic, and I don't really dig the main character all that much. So I almost didn't finish it actually, but I decided to sort of power through, and it was okay. It's fine, but I didn't love it, and I definitely won't be continuing the series, so I'm going to pass it along. Okay, the next book that I'm keeping from my 2019 reading list is called Topsy, and it is the startling story of the crooked-tailed elephant, P.T. Barnum, and the American wizard Thomas Edison. Bye, Sif. See you later. I read this book as research for my 2018 NaNoWriMo novel. So I tend to write the book in 30 days. I do a little bit of research beforehand, and then I sort of see where the book goes as I'm writing it, and I do more research for my historical fiction, which is where Topsy comes in. It's really sad, and it's kind of an indictment on how we treat animals in general, but specifically circus animals, and more specifically elephants, as like these creatures that we need to like tame and control when they're super intelligent, and our first instinct is typically to sort of punish animals for being animals, which is not cool. It's a very interesting look at super niche history. And also one of my best friends gave it to me, so I feel like this was probably going to stay on my shelf regardless of whether I liked it or not, but I really enjoyed this book, regardless of how sad and upsetting it was to read. So Topsy stays on the shelf. Next book that I am passing along is The Day Before. It is a Riverdale tie-in, and I liked it for what it is. It's sort of a fun little YA book with like some texting and emails and things. There's some texting right there. And it's kind of covers the events that happened right before the first season of Riverdale. So it's kind of what they were up to the day before Jason Blossom died. And honestly, short of that, I couldn't tell you what really happens in this book. So I read it really quickly. I had a good time reading it, but I've got enough other Archie stuff on my shelf. And maybe someone else will enjoy reading this more than I did. Maybe someone is more into Riverdale than I am. I don't see that happening, but passing it along. So our last tie-in of the year is Queen's Shadow, which is a Star Wars book about Padme. It takes place kind of right as she's stepping down from being the queen and becoming a senator instead. And it's mostly about her handmaidens and her relationship with her handmaidens. I loved this book. This was probably my favorite fiction book of the year. Whether or not we collected Star Wars books, this would probably stay on my shelf. I love the cover. I wrote about kind of like the cover and the story together on my Medium account. And this book is kind of an indicator of the really wonderful, like, female-focused Star Wars EU books that are coming out now more and more frequently. I read Leia a couple of years ago. I loved that. I read Lost Stars a couple of years ago. I loved that. I loved this. I'm really excited for more coming from E.K. Johnston. And I'm really excited to read more about Padme, sort of outside of the prequel trilogies, which I also really love. So I love Queen Shadow, and I recommend you go pick it up. Whether or not you like Star Wars, this is a really great female-led story. So my last book of the year, which I'm passing on, is Gunslinger Girl. I read this book because the book that I'm trying to get published at the moment is sort of a cross-genre Western, and Gunslinger Girl is a cross-genre Western. This one is a futuristic Western, so it takes place in sort of a sci-fi, like, different planet futuristic world, and has a main character that's a girl, like my book, and I wanted to sort of see how other authors were approaching similar concepts. I burned through this book during like midnight 4 a.m. pumping sessions early in the year, and I really wanted to love it more than I do. I think I wanted more world building or character depth, backstory, thank you Sif, something more from this book for being a decent length. I didn't feel like it dove deep enough. I wanted it to be something that really like surprised me or moved me in some way, and I don't think it delivered on that. So I didn't really super love this book. I'm going to pass it along, but if futuristic westerns, female-led adventure stories with a little bit of romance in them are your thing, I recommend it. I just don't think it's a very life-changing or super surprising book. So easy read, fun read, but nothing too deep. So that was my year in books of 2019. There were a couple of other books that I read that were library books, but those are my books that are getting cleared off my shelf. I'm doing a similar challenge this coming year, which is actually, you can see the little constellation behind me, just sort of a sneak peek. I am doing the hashtag Start on Your Shelf-a-thon from the Quiet Pond, which I will be talking way more about in my next video. I'm also giving away some of the books that I am passing along to subscribers. So leave a comment below of your 2019 favorite book pick, whether it's one of the books that I read or whether it's something completely different. But you let me know what your favorite book was in 2019. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel and leave that comment before February 1st to make sure that you are entered into the random giveaway. I will choose 5 comments before that point. And if you would be so kind, if you liked this video, leave a thumbs up down below and click on the bell to make sure that you get notifications every time I upload a new video. And maybe you'll find out about more giveaways in the future. Thank you guys so much and have a wonderful 2020 full of plenty of great reading.
Are you always this articulate?
Hercules. My name is Hercules.